this is kind of looking like a 2.6 inch group. So what are my excuses? Hey YouTube, welcome back to Arcane Armory. Today we're going to put the scope on our 1903 Springfield and see if we can get some groups out of this thing tomorrow. So to get started with, we have our cheapy scope that I acquired just to get some groups out of this thing. We're going to put a nicer scope on this later on when we get everything else done, because we want to be able to work at some longer ranges with this, being that it is a 30-06. So we've got our scope, we've got our cheapy rings that came with this scope, our level, our Allen wrench. Unfortunately, the Allen wrench is not ideal, because what we really want for that to be is a little insert we can put in our torque wrench, but this one is metric and I don't have any metric inserts for my torque wrench, so we're going to get it pretty close and try and get some groups on the target with that. So the first thing we need to do is we're going to get our scope mounted up in here, and we're going to check for our eye relief, and then from there it's really important that we get our crosshairs level, because if the crosshairs are not level, then when we go to dial for our elevation, our bore and our crosshairs are going to be on a different axis and they will not line up anymore once we start dialing. So it's really important that the gun is level when we start and that the scope is level when we're done. So let's go ahead and put the scope on. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do, we're just going to take a little denatured alcohol. We're just going to make sure that all of the debris is out of our scope ring bases. Pretty mild cleaner, so we don't have to worry about it damaging our scope. We're just going to clean up our scope and make sure that none of the lapping compound or anything is still on there, and that none of the dust or anything is going to upset our scope base. Now that our scope is temporarily mounted, we want to try and find a little bit of a natural shooting position, and we're going to set our eye relief. We use our marker, or it's our marks on anything pencil, to put a mark on there to make sure that nothing changes as we're making sure everything is level. So right there is pretty good. Now we know where our eye relief is going to be, so if we move anything a little bit, it'll still be okay. Well, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put our level on our scope ring and see if our rifle is flat. And that's pretty good, but it's not quite perfect. Now our scope ring is very nearly flat there, and we don't have to worry about this. This angle doesn't matter because it's set by the scope rings. It's the rotation that we're really concerned with. So we measured from the scope rings. We're going to make sure that our scope is not level, and it is not. I'm not sure if there's any such thing as perfect, but that's really close. So now we're just going to lock this down to make sure that nothing can rotate. We didn't use any blue Loctite because I don't want to have any trouble taking this back apart. We're going to shoot a test group with this, or maybe a couple test groups, and then we're going to take it back apart, so I don't really want any Loctite in there. So that's the basic steps of mounting a scope. We're going to do a more thorough job when we go to mount this on here permanently, and we'll go through all the steps in detail, but for right now this is going to get us some test groups. So I've seen it said on the internet that if your crosshairs are a little bit crooked because that's how you hold the rifle, that's okay. That is not true. Do not do that. Learn how to hold your rifle straight. If you set your rifle up so that the crosshairs are a little bit crooked and then you hold your rifle that way, that takes the bore and the scope off of the same axis, and now they're no longer aligned. And sure, they will intersect at one point where you're zeroed, but that's going to be it. So as you dial for elevation, you're going to run into issues with your trajectories going down and right or down and left, depending on how it's tilted, instead of straight down as we want it to do when we're trying to pull off those long range shots. All right, guys, we're finally out at the range. We're going to put a test group down range with this old girl. So we're not really going to zero this thing. We're just trying to see how big the groups are going to be. The wind is kind of blowing a little bit today, so it's going to open our groups up some, but we just want to see if we get them all on the paper and see if it's going to be this big or it's going to be this big. And they'll give us a pretty good evaluation of how our rifle is functioning, and then tell us what we need to do when we get back to the shop. So it was pretty cool to go shoot our first rounds to this 1903 Springfield since I bought it. I've never shot it before, so it was kind of nice to get some shots on paper and see what it can do. So if we take a look at our target here, get a rough measurement on this, and this is kind of looking like a 2.6 inch group, which at 100 yards, 2.5 MOA is pretty lousy for a hunting rifle. It's pretty lousy for any rifle, really, but especially lousy for a hunting rifle. Now, we have two in our string that are kind of outside of the group because we have our three middle ones here. If we just look at those three, which we can't exclude the other two because it's a 5-shot group, but we have to look at all 5. However, these 3 here in the middle is closer to a 0.6 inch group. So we're reading 0.87, and if we subtract the diameter of our bullets to go center to center, so it's more of a 1/2 inch group. So that tells me that this barrel and this rifle is capable of sub-MOA shooting, but we had 2 flyers that landed outside of that area. So what are my excuses? Well, excuse number 1 is this scope sucks. There's no other simple way to put that. First of all, if we think about our old mantra of aim small, miss small.
Aim small, miss small.
This only has a 9x magnification, which means we can't aim as small as we want to, compared to many other scopes with, say, a 12 or 18 or 24x magnification. But that's okay. This is just our first group, and so we know what we can work with on that. Excuse number 2 is that with this scope, there's only one little area where you can get a clear sight picture. If you move your head at all, it distorts the image and changes the colors and does all kinds of weird things that I've not experienced with other scopes. Excuse number 3 was we had a little bit of wind today, and it's not so much that it affected the bullets per se, but my target was flapping back and forth in the wind. And they might all have gone in the same spot, but if the target being leaned back and forth because of the breeze, that's definitely going to make our group sizes bigger. So that's one thing that we want to try and alleviate. Maybe we'll use a stiffer target backing in the future. So what did we learn with this experiment? Well, first thing we learned was that with these scope mounts, scope rings actually prevent our magazine lever from fully engaging. So where before we couldn't use the down position, now we can't fully use the up position, and it doesn't actually feed from the magazine. I loaded 5 rounds into this rifle, and none of them would feed. So these scope rings have to go. The second thing we learned is that our recoil pad doesn't. This is a great rifle to shoot, and I could shoot it all day, every day, with no complaints about the recoil whatsoever.
You liar.
What we want to do now is we want to try and get our groups to tighten up. So we use this. So we're going to use this as our benchmark, and we're going to see what kind of improvements we can make to this rifle, probably with a better scope, with better scope rings that aren't quite so high, as well as fully floating this barrel, and that's going to help us just a little bit too, and we'll get a basic bedding done on this and see if we can get all of those 5 rounds to land in that same little group. So once we take this rifle apart to do the barrel channel, we'll take the time to try and make this whole stock look really nice as well. So we know that it'll shoot, we know that it functions once I get the scope rings replaced, and so let's go ahead and try and make it look good as well. So if you guys like what we're trying to do here at Arcane Armory, please hit that like and subscribe button. That helps us out a bunch. And tune in next time, and we're going to go through disassembling this and getting it ready for refitting and barrel channel cutting.